다음으로 두 번째 세션은 그 외국인 분을 모셨는데요. How to make IT, OT convergence ultra secure and flexible at the same time이라는 주제로 SNC의 일야 페이긴 이분은 그 이스라엘의 인베디드 솔루션스라는 회사의 치프 커스터머 오피스도 같이 겸하고 계십니다. 여러분들이 공격이 들어올 때 최초의 정찰부터 있지 않습니까? 그래서 방화벽에 어떤 OS가 있고 어떤 제품이 있는지를 알면 그 제품의 취약점이 무엇인지 이걸 알아내서 공격을 시작하게 되는데, 방화벽이 어떤 제품인지 모르게끔 인비저블하게 만들 수 있는 그런 솔루션들에 대해서, 기술에 대해서 발표를 해 주실 예정입니다. 큰 박수 부탁드리겠습니다.
Thank you for the introduction, Dr. Kim. It's an honor to be here. I'm very excited to be here. As Dr. Kim presented me, I'm Ilya Feigin from Embedded Solutions. We are an Israeli cybersecurity company. Here in Korea, we are represented by SSNC. So I wanted to start a little bit by reminding ourselves what are the risks that we need to be mindful of when we consider cyber attacks. So of course, cyber attack impacts include loss of productivity, reputational damage, legal liability, but most directly, cyber attack involve financial losses. And the easiest way to get financial loss is through ransomware. And some statistics on ransomware. Ransomware is on the rise. Back in 2016, we had one ransomware attack every 40 seconds. In 2021, it was every 11 seconds. And it's missing here, but by 2030, we're going to have ransomware attack every 2 seconds. So basically, we are in a torrent of ransomware attack. And also breaches, as you can see, it takes a lot of time to get discovered. So we have around 200 days to discover that the breach has even happened, and then 70 more days in order to contain the breach. And as you know, of course, the longer it takes to discover the breach, the more costly it will be. And it's also important to understand that it's not one-time cost. There is a long tail of cost. So this is first year it's going to be 2/3 of the cost, and then next year is going to be more cost, and so forth. So even several years after the breach, we're still going to suffer from the effect of the breach. So now I want to talk a little bit about the technologies behind these statistics and what technologies are becoming obsolete and what technologies are rising. So obsolete, maybe it's a big word. So first I want to talk about firewalls. And of course, all of us use firewalls to protect our networks. There is no way around that. And firewalls are still critical. We cannot avoid using firewalls. But the question is, can we trust our firewalls completely? And the answer is no. And I'm going to share in the next slide why we need to combine firewalls with additional products. We cannot trust the firewall by themselves. And next technology is data diodes. So data diodes seems very good, it's a very secure solution. We have one-way communication, and we can enable this communication to our ultra-secure environments, such as industrial environments. And then we can only use it to collect some logs, send them to the corporate environment, analyze the logs, and then send them to the cloud for further displaying. But the problem starts what happens when we need to control these remote devices. Like what if we have a device in the field that we actually need to control? And the only way, there are two ways to do it. One is to create a bypass around the data diode, which beats the purpose of data diode. And second one is even worse, when we go physically to the device that we want to manage, connect with the laptop, the technician does, and then we manage the device. Of course, both of these options are not great for security, to say the least. Next, password encryption. password encryptions are by definition not good defense from insider attacks. Insiders, especially insider administrators, they are going to have the passwords. So it's going to be very hard for us to really rely on password protection. And that's why many companies are moving away from passwords. And in the next slide, I'm going to show recent interesting trends about password as well. As to VPN, and here I'm talking about site-to-site VPN, when we need to connect two different sites over unsecure network. The way it's usually done is using some encryption and key. But of course, when we have a key and encryption, sooner or later it can be decrypted and the password discovered or leaked to attackers, and we lost our protection. So that's why this technology, that's one of the reasons this technology is not rising. Now, if you look on the other side, the technologies and concepts that are growing very quickly. Of course, it's zero trust network access, which are probably we're going to hear a lot about during this conference. But what does it mean, zero trust network access? So everyone can define it differently, and there are many ways to define it. But there are some critical component here, which is going to be theme of this particular presentation, is that we have to take the human out of the equation, because if you have a human, you have a administrator who controls the whole process, sooner or later this human can be insider attacker, he can make a mistake, and so forth. So zero trust network access also means other things like granular network segmentation, to make sure that we have as few devices as possible in each segment of the network. Why? Because if you have an attack, no lateral movement will be possible. In addition, of course, we cannot just rely on a user because he's inside the network. We have to authenticate him multiple times as we go. And of course, we have to employ artificial intelligence and machine learning to notice if there are any attempts to breach the trust in the zero trust. Now let's talk about IT-OT convergence. So when we talk about data diodes, it also was attempt to do this IT-OT convergence, but it has to be bidirectional. Of course, it has to be compliant with IEC 62443 and other certifications, but it has to be bidirectional. Why? Because what I mentioned before about bypass of data diodes and about people not using data diodes and physically coming to devices being managed. The next topic is, in my opinion, the most important and is not talked about nearly enough, is invisible security. And Dr. Kim mentioned briefly about invisible security, but what's important to understand here is, as long as the device, whatever the device is, let's assume it's a firewall, is as long as it's visible on the network. Visible means it has IP address, MAC address, it has latency. Attackers can discover that it's there. As long as the device is visible, it can be attacked. It can be advanced persistent threat. It can be zero-day attack. It can be any other attack. So in order for us to be able to exclude these attacks, we have to make the device invisible. Is it impossible? No, I believe it's not impossible, and I'm going to show how we believe we can make devices invisible. And the last technology I want to mention here is white box cryptography. And why do I talk about white box cryptography? Is the same part of, it's a very critical component of zero trust, of taking the human out of the equation. White box cryptography, there is no key, there is no password. The algorithm and the key is changing every frame that is sent over the network. So it's nearly impossible for attackers to compromise it. So let's talk a little bit about firewalls. So I mentioned before that firewalls are vulnerable. So what did I mean by that? So here you see the breakdown of top vendors in firewalls. Mostly it's next generation firewalls. And you see here all the top brands like Palo Alto, Fortinet, Checkpoint, Juniper, etc. And every couple of months, sometimes every month, you hear about widespread attack on one of them. So there was a zero-day attack on Palo Alto, zero-day attack on Fortinet. And what does it mean if you have a zero-day attack on a firewall? That means that an attacker can connect to a firewall, remove the rules that we put there to protect our network, and put their own rules instead, or just say allow any-to-any, basically preventing a firewall from doing any help. So the point I wanted to make in this slide is to show that yes, there is a constant cycle. We have vulnerabilities found, but first there's zero-day vulnerabilities, and nobody knows about them except for a small group of attackers and maybe government actors. But then a vulnerability is published, and after it's published, a couple of months later, or maybe weeks later at least, the vendor is going to publish a patch for the device, let's say firewall. And after that, do we install the patch immediately? Of course not. We cannot install patches immediately in a production environment. So more time passes before we can install the patches in a production environment. Meanwhile, we have several months that our network is not protected. Our network is not protected. So this is a very dangerous situation that we have to, the reason we put a firewall in the first place is to protect the network because it's sensitive enough. Now, if it's sensitive enough, we have to be able to protect it. The next thing I want to talk about passwords. So I found this recently online, and I was frankly I was shocked because I was using passwords that I thought was very secure. We had my password was 8 characters. I used numbers, uppercase, lowercase, and special symbols. That should be enough, no? So it takes 5 minutes to break a password like that in today's technology. So we are not talking yet about quantum technology. We are not talking about directory, so using the direct dictionaries. We are not talking about rainbow attacks. None of that. All of that would accelerate this even further. So basically, the conclusion that I draw from this is that passwords already today, not in the quantum world, already today, we can no longer rely on password for critical assets, and we have to use other technologies. And as much as possible, take the human out of the equation. So next, I wanted to show a little bit what I meant by hiding the firewall. So in this environment, you have external network, which is the internet, and the corporate network. And we have a firewall on the perimeter to protecting our network. And today, in today's work, let's assume we had a Fortinet firewall over there. Recently, as I mentioned, Fortinet had a zero-day attack. So that means someone from external leg of the firewall was able to access the firewall, change the rules in the firewall, which is, of course, the worst thing you can do to a firewall is change the rule externally from the external leg. So what can we do about that? So here on the left, you see as-is situation, which is where most firewalls today are. So firewall is vulnerable to zero-day attack. In addition, of course, the firewall can be plainly misconfigured. As long as we have people can make mistakes, or either on purpose or by mistake. We can have exposed admin interfaces, default password, or just not having the latest patch. So what is the solution to that? So the solution that we believe would help the situation is putting a special kind of device. It's a UTM, Unified Threat Management device, that combines many different technologies to defend against many different threats. And I'm going to talk more about this device later, what this device is. But basically, the result is that firewall is now invisible. But of course, firewall operates as usual. So all the rules we had before on the firewall will keep working as they should. And now we can now the firewall is invisible. Invisible means inside attackers cannot do anything to the firewall. They don't see it. Outside attackers also cannot see the firewalls. So the question that you may ask, okay, so how is the firewall managed if nobody can see it? And there are several solutions to that. The best solution is to use some sort of firewall policy management system that only that firewall policy management system be allowed to access the device. This is the most sort of smooth solution for a large organization. For small organization, it can be solved in other ways as well. So So this was about firewall hiding. Now I discussed about data diode and why I don't believe it's a good solution for separating IT and OT networks. So here, this is what we see. This is a typical industrial network architecture, of course, very high level. So we have a bunch of PLCs that are in the field, part of the industrial networks, and then we have a, let's say, SCADA server, but it could be other control server on the other side. And usually what we would have is a data diode. We would collect the logs, pull them to the SCADA server through data diode, one-way communication. And this way we would ensure that nobody can hack from the internet or from the corporate network to the critical infrastructure network. So here we provide bidirectional communication. How are we allowed to do bidirectional communication that is still compliant with 62443 is because we limit the communication very, very strongly. We use deep packet inspection to perform whitelist approval to all the communication that is happening. We do other criteria like time of day, bandwidth, MAC IP address of the target and the source, other custom rules. We also provide multi-factor authentication when we want to manage it. In addition, we should do honeypot because the only way for us to know, remember when I said that attacks sometimes take 270 days to discover, we can discover it way quicker if we have honeypots because then we can log and see what's going on in the honeypot. Next, so this is a multi-site network. So when we have site-to-site VPN, as I mentioned, we have an issue that usually we have a key and password, and sooner or later this key and password can leak, and then the network can be compromised. So the solution that we believe is best is white box cryptography, when every packet is encrypted with different protocol and different encryption key. So it's nearly impossible to hack it even with quantum technology. This is a way to connect two sites, in my opinion. I think maybe I hope I didn't go too quick. So yeah, please let me know if there are any questions.
예, 여기 영어로 질문하고 싶으신 분은 질문해 주시면 발제자분이 대답해 주실 거고요. 한국어로 질문하고 싶으시면 SSNC 한은혜 대표님이 대답해 주실 테니까 편한 랭귀지를 선택해 주시면 되겠습니다. 예, 그러면 제가 한 가지 질문 드리도록 하겠습니다. What is the important invisible security for cyber physical systems?
So it's a great question. So if I understood correctly, your question is like, why should I care about invisibility? I already have my firewalls. I already have my other network protection, intrusion protection system, detection system. Why do I need invisibility? And the answer is to make sure that in this cycle of patch vulnerability found, patch released, patch deployed, and so forth, the cycle may take several months. If you have a critical network, how do you protect the network during this cycle? And the only way to do it is to make sure that the firewall, that the critical components that you have to use, that it cannot be attacked during. There cannot be zero-day attack in your Fortinet or your Palo Alto device. The only way to ensure that is if the device is invisible. And of course, the device, the UTM device that I mentioned, it has to be invisible by itself as well, because otherwise it beats the purpose.
예, 발표해 주신 발제자분께 큰 박수 부탁드리겠습니다. 땡큐.